we are. God damn it. Okay. Hey, we all are. Okay, one second. Sorry. I just keep on laughing in my head. Hey, we are Group 5, and we explored an NFL dataset as our final project for CSC366. Initially, this project seemed daunting because of the sheer amount of data that we had. Looking at our dataset, we had 3 tables: players, teams, and plays. Teams is very straightforward. If you know football, it's just a collection of teams and seasons played. Players is more data intensive, with a lot of personal information about each player and what team they were on for what a given season. Lastly, we had the beefy dataset plays. This dataset made up a major majority of our data in our database, and we needed to trim nearly over 200 columns it had.
So luckily, we were able to formulate questions that only required specific use of this data set, and we were able to trim a lot of it. So we ended up only needing the play ID, game ID, passer, rusher, and receiver IDs, the play description, the play type, and the amount of yards gained. So what's cool is here that there's enough data here to do many, many different projects and queries. You can use different parts of the plays table to create new narratives like sacks per game, total yards, including special teams, and even establish linear regression models for both offensive and defensive players. So let's look at an example query using this database. And all these queries were run locally using the Dolt SQL API. So this first one lists the 5 most popular colleges for NFL players in the 2000 to 2001 season. And as you can see, using Dolt SQL, it gave us these 5 and the query time of around 5.28 seconds. The second one uses the place table, so naturally it took longer. So this the second query was, what are the total yards gained by each team each season? And there's a snippet there that lists just it groups by team and by season, and it lists the total yards gained for that season. So this query took about 3.5 minutes because there are hundreds of thousands of plays to sift through and aggregate together. So
yeah, and after performing both of well, pretty much all of these queries in both Dolt SQL, which is a version of MySQL that we utilized for this project, as well as Dynamo.db, which is a key value database. Here are some of the conclusions that we found after running through all these tests. So first was that it was really, really easy to set up our structured Dolt SQL database. It made it not only really readable from the get-go, but also really useful for updating and removing rows, etc. Not quite the same for Dynamo. It was a little bit harder to get started, get off the ground, but because of all the keys and partitions that you create, it made it really easy to read at the end of the day after everything was set up. In terms of maintainability for both these databases, they were very similar. Both of them are very easy to update, remove rows from, etc. And they both look very similar in terms of how they feel. And lastly is their performance. The Dolt SQL or MySQL structured database was much quicker at answering very specific questions that were centered around the keys or anything directly relating to keys, as well as very short questions, such as what are the 5 most popular colleges? It took around 5 seconds to actually do. But Dynamo was very good at the more complex or repeated query questions, such as what are the total yards gained by each team each season, because of its key value structure.
Overall, we approached this project through the lens that we needed to be normalized more, and consistent with such a vast amount of data. We use both 3NF and BCNF normalization processes as described in class on our data set. We found the BCNF to be most useful in understanding and creating context for our data. We find that normalization did help us to have a better understanding of the data, and it also made it easier to read at just a glance. In terms of normalization and specialization of our data, the normalization improves the code and understanding, thus the maintainability going forward was easier both in MySQL and Dynamo, since we were able to know what belonged in each table. In regards to performance, Adult SQL was better on most of the queries that we ran because of its ability to combine data in a quicker rate. We used Discord as well as Adult Hub for collaborating on this project and recording this super easy video. And made working together super simple and really laid back. Through this data, we were able to gather the fact that there are 17 players that played in the NFL that graduated from Cal Poly, as you can see from the data set that is on the screen. Thanks for watching Group 5.
Awesome. That's pretty good, guys.